Hello and welcome back. Today we will start with lecture 3 of module 2. So far we have looked at a couple of theories with respect to language learning, language acquisition. Today we will start with the other variables. As I mentioned in the previous lecture, after the theoretical positions, most important theoretical scaffolding have been discussed. Now we need to look at some more things that are some more important variables, which are also quite crucial with respect to all the debates, all the controversies with respect to how we learn language. There have been many such things put forward. So, we will be able to discuss about 4 of them. We will start with critical period hypothesis and the theory of mind today, and in the next lecture we will talk about joint attention and body schematics. So, of course, this is not an exhaustive list, but this is where we will make a beginning, and as we go ahead with the course material, as and when required and relevant, we will discuss the other things, the other variables that come across. So, let us start with critical period hypothesis. Now, critical period hypothesis primarily says that there is a critical or say a significant time window within which one has to learn language, beyond which language learning may not be optimal. That is the primary crux of the matter, but now let us see how it is positioned and within what broad idea that is positioned and so on. So, before we get into critical period hypothesis, let us understand what is critical period itself. Now, critical period is a time window, very interestingly it is a very short time window in the early part of neonatal or postnatal life. So, immediately after birth there is a very small temporal window that is given to many animals, where they need to fine tune certain of their innate capabilities. That is what is critical period. So, where specific experiences are crucial for the development of certain skills. This is a domain general sort of an understanding, right. So, there can be many such skills as we will see. So, for many other less complex nervous systems, the animals which have less complex nervous systems, behavioral repertoire like foraging, fighting strategies are developed by intrinsic developmental mechanisms and are in place early. So, what we mean by this is that many animals, so every animal has its own intrinsic capability, right. So, the birds need to learn how to fly within a very short span of time. Similarly, certain animals of prey, so that the predatory animals, they need to learn how to hunt within a particular span of time. That time window might be different from one species to another, but there is a time window, that is the most important part here. Similarly, there is something called imprinting. So, for many birds, there is the imprinting of their parents happen very short, within a very short time window after the in the postnatal life. So, nervous systems, so not only this is applicable not only for the higher animals with the more complex nervous system, but this is also available for the less complex ones. So, nervous systems of the complex animals are influenced by particular circumstances, and these experiences are crucial for the development of those innate qualities. So, even if you are born with, so a tiger is born with the capability of hunting, or a lion is born with the capability of hunting, chasing and hunting the animals of prey, but until and unless that experience they are exposed to, this will not really work out, that is the idea. So, imprinting in birds, as I was just saying, happen in a severely restricted time window in early postnatal, post hatching period of life. In fact, this has been utilized in a very interesting way in some parts of China, where they use a certain variety of goose as a pest control mechanism. So, rather than using chemical pesticides, they use those geese in their field to eat all the pests. And so, what happens is that because the time window for imprinting is very short, rather than having the mother goose present near the hatchlings, they place a certain kind of a stick colored in a particular way. So, when the hatchlings first are able to see, they see that stick and consider that to be the mother. And as you all know that ducks or geese, they have this habit of following. So, the mother will be going in front and all the chicks will follow, and so that is the exact mechanism which the farmers use there. So, the farmer will have the stake in his hand and he will move ahead and all the chicks will follow. So, that is how he takes them into the field. So, imprinting has been utilized in a very novel way by the farmers there, but this is the idea of imprinting. So, very short time window after they have hatched, this is when they have to imprint. That is what, so whatever they see at that time, they consider it to be their parent. Now, this idea, so what is the crux of the matter? The crux of the matter till now is that in the animal world, we see a critically important time window within which the species, the members of the species must master those skills. Now, that is during those times, two things come together, the innate capacity, innate inbuilt system, which in turn works in tandem with the experiences that are given. So, together they develop the skill. Now, if that time window is missed somehow, that skill will not develop. That is the idea. Now, taking this to human language acquisition system, Eric Lenneberg gave his very important theory of critical period hypothesis. So, the idea as per him was that the onset of language is marked by a peculiar language specific maturation schedule. This is from his 1967 work. So, since language learning is innately guided, so critical period hypothesis is very strongly based on the innateness hypothesis, that language is an innate capacity, just like the hunting capacity of the larger animals and so on. So, because this is innate, there must be a some sort of a critical time window for us to master that. That is the idea. So, then that is why he says, because it is innately guided. So, we have the mechanism already inbuilt, this must be following a certain kind of a maturational stage. And then he bases his theory, most of it is based on the brain maturation hypothesis, the stages of maturation of the human brain. So, he has a very solid foundation there, because under his understanding was that the hemispheric specialization takes place during this particular period. So, why is this critical period there? Because that is when the hemispheric specialization is happening. So, what is hemispheric specialization? Hemispheric specialization, or we can also call it behavioral laterality and so on. Basically, this means that specializing certain brain areas get specialized for certain kinds of activities or skills in humans. So, in our case, language is supposed to reside in the left hemisphere. So, that left hemispheric specialization for language happens during that time. We are not born with the lateralization intact, but this is what happens during those stages, and that is what is the equivalent to the critical period as far as Lenneberg is concerned. So, what he says is that because the brain is maturing that time, lateralization is ongoing that time, child's brain is flexible. So, that is why you are able to pick up those, or let us say master those skills. Now, this evidence his evidence comes from various findings in that domain. The most important point of departure is that unlike many other species, human brain continues to grow after birth. This is the most important, most crucial thing here, because the entire theorizing is based on that simple thing. So, human brain continues to grow after birth till next few years. It is not a very short time, it takes a few years for the human brain to mature. And because of this, it is possible that during that time the maturation stages will be unfolding, and that is why it is the critical period. So, as a result, hemispheric lateralization continues throughout childhood. So, one of the accounts of this process, so there are many theories as to how that process happens. There are many theories. One of them is that it is called the equipotentiality hypothesis. Now, this hypothesis primarily states that two hemispheres of in case of humans, two hemispheres are similar with respect to language when they are born. So, there is no language specific specialization when immediately after birth or at birth, so to say. So, this means that each hemisphere is equally capable of acquiring the processes that is responsible for language. It is only later that the left hemisphere matures into a specialized language center. So, we are not born with a specialized system. Both hemispheres are equally capable of having the processes, acquiring the processes, and with the during those maturational stages, the left hemisphere gets to master that skill. That is why CPH, that is critical period hypothesis, is considered to be one of the best known version of this hypothesis. So, there is a almost direct one-to-one mapping on the equipotentiality hypothesis and the critical period hypothesis, because they both say the almost the same thing. So, critical period hypothesis is can be considered in that light. Now, Lenneberg's theory drew support from brain damaged patients data. During those days, the most of the data that we have from brain with respect to language localization in the brain or any other kinds of functions, primarily language, came from patients data. It was not common in those days for normal healthy individuals to undergo various kinds of testing, which is of course common now, because now we have advanced technology to do that, but that time primary data came from the patients. So, brain damaged patients data is what Lenneberg primarily used. He showed that age had an impact on the recovery post any kind of brain damage. So, if the brain damage particularly happens to the left hemisphere, it leads to significant, maybe even permanent language impairment. So, one of his key finding was that children typically tend to recover their linguistic skills, however, adults find it nearly impossible. So, in case of severe sort of brain damage to the left hemisphere, children recover their capacity to speak faster. In most cases adults, depending on the nature of damage of course, but in case of adults the chances are very less. So, this was one of his major arguments, that that is because the child's brain is still maturing. It has still not become rigid, it has not become all fixed. That is why they even after damage, they are, because it is work under construction sort of. So, they are still able to overcome the difficulties. So, in fact, post brain damage or surgical removal, the function of the left hemisphere can be taken over by the right as well, if the child is young enough, as there were many findings that have shown that. However, the same will not happen for adults. In case of adults, the language loss might be permanent. Another set of evidence comes from the particular condition called crossed aphasia, where damage to the right hemisphere causes language deficit among children. So, this is why it is called cross. So, language right hemisphere gets damaged and the left hemisphere language is in the left hemisphere, that capacity gets affected. So, this points towards the claim that brain is not yet lateralized. So, that is a lot of give and take there is still there between the. Again, there was another finding, quite an important one, by Dennis and Whittaker in 1976, that found that children who had the entire left cortex removed had more difficulty learning syntax compared to those who had right cortex removed. So, you can see there were a number of findings with respect to brain damage and post damage recovery among children versus among adults. Also, what happens if the entire left hemisphere cortex has been removed, and so on and so forth. So, various kinds of findings led Lenneberg's theory into believing that Lenneberg to believe that language is language learning can happen best during that time when the brain is still maturing, and they can that is as a result it is resolute enough to overcome all these various kinds of difficulties. But then that was 67, 70s, this finding was 76 and all that. So, 60s and 70s this was fine, but later findings have pointed out various issues with the with these claims. Most important criticism was the methodological issue, also the number of samples, because how many patients data will you get, how many people will turn up with the exact kind of brain damage, and so that you can compare and so on and so forth. So, the sample size has been one critical issue, another was the methodology applied and so on. So, there have been controversies, but nonetheless we still have some cases where we do find evidence that kind of corroborates with the claim of critical period hypothesis. Now, there are other kinds of proof as well. The most famous cases are of that of Jeannie and Isabel. as any textbook will tell you. So, the case of Ginny is quite a famous one. She was locked in a room without any human contact till she was 13. She grew up in a particularly abusive household, where nobody was allowed, by her father, nobody was allowed to talk to her, and she was in a room, locked in a room, tied to a chair, and that is how she lived for 13 years of her life. So, when she was rescued by the officials, she was not speaking, she had no language, she did not learn language at all, because of course, nobody was speaking to her, and she was left to be on her own entirely. So, after rescuing, there was a lot of effort to teach her language, and there are some reports that she did learn some words and so on, but largely she did not really master language as well as her age matched controls. So, the idea that the primary finding in this case, in case of Ginny, was that she never learned language properly. Of course, for few years scientists were given access to her, but later that was denied. So, we do not know what happened after that to her, but as much as we know, she never mastered language. So, even when there was a bit of a claim that she learned language, that is also controversial, because not everybody agreed as to what degree she learned. Now, she was discovered at the age 13, which is much beyond the age of critical period that Lenneberg talked about. By the way, critical period, though it is very difficult to pinpoint a particular age, but it is kind of agreed upon that the critical period lasts till puberty. So, pre-puberty, puberty around that time. So, 11, 12, 13, that is the age bracket that Lenneberg and others talked about. Of course, there are many findings that also point towards slightly different age bracket, but there has been many disagreements on that, but largely puberty. So, this Ginny is not her real name, this was a name given by others. So, Ginny was discovered at age 13, and she did not learn language, that is our main component here. Now, compare this to the other case of Isabel. This is a similar kind of a case. She was prisoned in a dark room till the age of 7. Her only human contact was her deaf and mute mother. She also had no language. She had very low IQ, and she could make some strange noises and so on. So, when she was found, she was thought to be deaf and mute like her mother, as she could only make some noises. She had extremely low IQ and had a mental age of about 1.5-year-old. She was 7 years old, but her mental age was that of a 1.5-year-old. However, as opposed to Ginny, Isabel showed much better signs of improvement upon training. So, she was also given training therapies and so on, and after some time she did catch up and she learned language. The success of Isabel as opposed to Ginny is presented as a strong proof for the critical period hypothesis, because Isabel was discovered before the critical period got over, meaning that she was discovered when her brain was still maturing, and hence she could be taught, but on the other hand Ginny had crossed that age, and that is why she did not. So, there are various such claims, and this is not only about Ginny and Isabel, there are many other cases. There are feral children found in many other places in the world. In India as well, there was a particular case, there was another case in France, and so on and so forth. So, most cases of course, they become part of legends. So, we do not know how much of it is to be believed, but largely there is an agreement that most cases of feral children, they never learn to speak, and as a result of which they seem to be giving a very strong proof for critical period hypothesis. Now, since we can go on debating on the age of the brain maturation and where the critical period ends and so on, that is one domain. Now, let us move on to what happens after lateralization. Fine, lateralization happens, specialization of certain domains within the brain happens. So, is that rigid after that age? Is there no way to alter it? and how far do we take it, that is another domain of critical evaluation. So, upon maturation, language dependent on auditory vocal loop are found to be represented in a particular cortical region, vocal auditory loop as in spoken language. So, the language that are spoken after maturation, this is considered to be localized in the left hemisphere primarily and certain areas, certain critical cortical regions. Now, the same cortical regions are also found to be representing language for native speakers of American Sign Language. So, not only the spoken language, but also sign language languages have been found to be localized in a particular area in the brain. So, which means some sort of a rigidity is there with respect to language localization in the human brain. So, that means this points to the fact that left hemispheric specialization is a characteristic feature of language itself in its abstract form and not as a byproduct of sensory motor factors. So, sign language is of one modality, spoken language of another modality, but at an abstract level, at a higher node, the abstract knowledge system of language is represented in a particular region in the brain. So, this kind of talks about some amount of rigidity in cortical arrangement and developmental pattern. Now, while this is fine, this is true to a large extent, recent findings in neuroscience also point towards a remarkable amount of plasticity that is part of human brain. So, this is called neuroplasticity. This is recent findings, of course, last few decades of findings that have as a result of which this kind of findings have posed serious questions with respect to the critical period hypothesis. So, most of the findings have come from the brain of the vertebrates. So, proof from humans includes some very important and interesting studies like the ones reported by, for example, one by Sadato et al. 1996. What they found was, this was a landmark study. They found that blind individuals who were asked to discriminate braille dots have significantly higher blood flow compared to sighted controls in the visual cortex. So, what is the most important variable here is the case of visual cortex. Now, let us remember few things here. Of course, we will take it up later in the brain and language segment in much more detail. But when we talk about language areas in the brain, what are we basically talking about? We are talking about the Broca's area, the Wernicke's area, these are the most important one. So, Broca's area is responsible for articulation, speech. As I am speaking, I am using my Broca's area. Wernicke's area is used for comprehension, but apart from these two, there are many other areas. For example, the visual cortex. The visual cortex is significant, very significant for our language processing. So, visual language processing, the visual form of language that we process, there visual cortex comes into play. Similarly, we also have the sensory motor cortex and the auditory cortex. So, these are the domains which are together they are called the language areas in the brain. Now, when you are processing language, when you are processing visual language, your visual cortex will be activated. So, when I am reading, let us say when I am reading a book, I am reading anything written, my visual cortex is active, because that information goes through my visual apparatus and gets there the processing starts. Now, this particular study looked at blind individuals. So, blind individuals automatically means that they are not using the visual cortex for its original purpose, because obviously because they are blind. Now, the finding shows that even when they are asked to discriminate braille dots, as in they are using their tactile sensation, that is when the visual cortex gets activated. Now, this is a remarkable finding because that means visual cortex, whose primary job is to process visual information, can be activated by tactile information as well. This was taken as a very important finding in support of neuroplasticity, that the brain can modulate itself according to various kinds of factors. So, in this case visual cortex taking up the additional job of processing tactile information. So, this is one. there are many other findings as well. So, in the domain of language, research has also proved plasticity with respect to learning languages. Another important finding around the same time by Talal et al. Showed extensive training in rate modified speech and temporal discrimination to language learning impaired children resulted in them learning language. So, even if they have crossed the critical so called critical period of learning, but if you modulate your teaching mechanism by modulating the rate of speech and temporal discrimination, this can result in the children learning language better. So, the children who had who suffered from language impairment, learning impairment could learn language through by using this method. So, this is another finding. Then there is one more by Varga Khadem et al. 1997. They reported a particular case called case Alex. Now, this was about a boy, a small boy, little boy. He had a problem, particular syndrome, because of which he failed to develop language throughout his childhood. His comprehension was stagnated. So, he could not produce speech and his comprehension. So, both comprehension and production were severely compromised. His comprehension was stagnated at age equivalent of 3 to 4 years. Now, however, he went through a medical procedure called hemidecodification, which at age 8.5, basically removing the left hemisphere surgically. After age 9, his anticonvulsants were removed. Once all these processes were over, after age 9, he started suddenly to acquire speech and language, and he did remarkably well for his condition. So, this suggests that language can be learnt with the residual abilities of the right hemisphere if the inhibitory effect of the damaged left hemisphere is removed, even at an advanced age. Advanced age as in for a child, learner 9 years is quite late. So, even at that stage, if you are removing the left hemisphere which is damaged, in that case the right hemisphere might be able to take up, as was proved by the case of Alex. So, there are such findings and there are many more, which, as I said, I will take up in more detail later. Now, then how do we then explain the something that is almost commonsensical, that it is more difficult to learn language at a later stage as opposed to children. Children learn languages effortlessly. So, there have been many newer explanations for that. One of them has have said that probably it is much more than to do with critical period. It is not just the brain maturational stages, it is not just that a time window, but there might be many other factors coming together and creating the model situation. So, some findings of course talk about that critical period might hold not in a entirely domain general way, not entirely applicable for all the language purposes, but certain kinds of linguistic features might suffer more for in terms of critical period as opposed to others. So, which means that you might be able to master a language largely for the most part, barring a few particular slightly difficult grammatical constructions. So, there are some findings with respect to that as well. With respect to critical period hypothesis, we will be taking it up later in the in another segment, because there has been a lot of studies in terms of second language acquisition and how far critical period hypothesis holds for second language acquisition. So, there we will come back to it, but anyway, so this is another explanation. And yet another explanation have been put forward, which is called fundamental difference hypothesis, that primarily says that all children are born with universal grammar. However, after an age in adulthood, that universal grammar stops being operative. So, it is not about it is not primarily about language specialization in the brain. It might be, but it need not be the only reason. Another reason could be the universal grammar with which we are born and which might stop being operative after a particular age. So, these are various ways of explaining why critical period may or may not hold. Now, let us move on to yet another important domain of understanding, another variable which is very critical for learning language, which is called theory of mind. Now, what is theory of mind? This is a very important prerequisite for developing socio-cognitive skills. This includes developing a sense of others' thoughts and intentions, and consequently it helps in creating our responses. So, basic idea here is that the humans are not born with the understanding that people have unique beliefs and thoughts. This is the most important notion here, the unique beliefs and thoughts, which means that each individual is capable of having his or her own unique belief system, and we might differ from one another. So, this is something, this is not innate, this is a learned behavior. You learn it, you know it through experiences in your early childhood, that what I am thinking may not be the same as another person who is looking at the same situation. This is arrived through various developmental ladders that children go through. There are many components that have been proposed with respect to theory of mind. How do children understand that? That I have a mind, thought, belief and all that. Basically, I have a mind which takes care of my thoughts, which takes care of my beliefs, and as a result of this there is a certain set of behaviors that is unique to me. Similarly, the same set of behaviors and thought process can be there with respect to another person. This is at the very root of our socio-cognitive skills. For us to be able to function normally in the human society, this is a fundamental notion, fundamental building block of our behavior. And then how do children arrive at that? The idea is that it has many components. The first and foremost component of it is called is attention, and notion of attention and intention of others, as well as imitation of others' mental states. So, the first stage is attention. Children learn very early that looking is not just seeing, but also a tool to selectively be used to gather more information. Recent findings show that children, very small children, are capable of modulating attention of the others in her environment, primarily the parents, the mother. They know how to get attention, how to modulate their attention and get them to attend to the child himself or herself. So, infants have been found to be using this mechanism in their parents with their parents for getting attention. Infants as early as 7 to 9 months of age are capable of understanding attention in others. The development of this social skill is an important predecessor to developing theory of mind. So, Simon Baron Cohen is the person who has been one of the most important scholars in this domain. So, basically what we are saying here is attention as a mechanism is something children figure out very early in life. In fact, more recent findings talk about even 6 months or even less, when children figure out that when you are looking at something, you are not just seeing it, but you are attending to it. That fundamental understanding develops very early, and that is what they even start to use in order to get by. And this stage is followed by acting. Knowing that people act on what catches their attention, this is what is at the root of goal directed behavior, and this behavior is dependent on intention. So, you are looking at something, you intend to, for example, a child looking at a toy means that he or she intends to have it, if they want to take it, they want somebody to. So, what will they do? They will start crying or something, so that they get the catch the attention of the parents, who will in turn give it to them. So, they have not only figured out in very early stages of life that the attentional mechanism, but they can also act on it, that is the idea. So, people can have various varying intentions and therefore different behavior. Imitation is also often understood to be another important component in developing theory of mind. This is something that has been discussed with respect to pretend play that children typically indulge in. Very often you will see they pretend to be the teacher, and they will make the other friends pretend as the students. So, pretend play is a very important landmark in their developmental trajectory, where you know that they have figured it out. So, theory of mind is already in place, because they know how a teacher thinks or how a teacher behaves. The teacher behaves in a particular way because they think in a particular way, and they can imitate that. So, by being able to imitate, we consider them being able to figure out the theory of mind of the teacher. So, basically, so theory of mind is written like this, ToM. The theory of mind refers to the ability to attribute mental states to oneself and to others. The idea that others have intents, beliefs, pretension, knowledge, etc., and that these can be different from one's own. This is the fundamental idea of theory of mind. In normal population, this grows by the time the humans are about 5 years old. However, in case of atypical children, this is a little late. So, whether it is ADHD or autism spectrum disorder, ToM development happens a little later. So, there is a delay of ToM, which is often a very significant aspect of their cognitive delays. So, having ToM then entails that others have beliefs and thoughts and etc., and mental states cause behavior. This difference may result into different behavioral outcome. Hence, having a theory of mind helps us predict others' behaviors. This is another very important aspect of theory of mind. You can predict. So, once you know that this is how the other person probably thinks, and this will be resulting in this kind of behavior, you can predict, right. This is an innate and potential ability that also requires social and other experiences to fully develop. Now, this is the fundamental aspect of it, but now how do you know whether a child has acquired the theory of mind or not? So, whether a child is developing normally can be ascertained from various factors like language, social behavior and so on. Theory of mind underlies the social cognitive aspect, socio-cognitive aspect, and thus is an important landmark in the development of children. One of the most important tests of theory of mind is called the false belief task. This task is designed to elicit if a child can show his or her understanding of false belief. So, this is one of the most important, most commonly utilized games that is used with children to figure out if they are able to pass the false belief task. Now, this is called initially it was called Sally and Anne story. So, the story goes like this. So, there are two characters in this, there is Sally and there is Anne. This is Sally's basket, this is Anne's box, and Sally puts a red ball into the basket and Anne is standing there. Sally goes out of the room and leaves Anne alone, and then after Sally moves out of the room, Anne then moves the red ball from the basket to the box, and then Sally comes back. This is a scenario that is played out for the child. It could be in a picture format, or it could be in an animated format, or some any other format you can play it out the child. And now, child once Sally is back, she wants to play with the ball. At this point, the experimenter will ask the child a question. The question will be, where will Sally look for her ball? Now, the child knows, because the child has seen that the red ball has moved from the basket to the box, but Sally does not know. Now, at this point, if the child says that Sally will look for the ball in the box, child has failed the test. But if the child says Sally will look at it in the basket, child will have passed the test. Why? What is false belief here then? The false belief here is that Sally will falsely believe to the ball to be still in the basket. So, the child is at that stage able to dissociate himself or herself from Sally. Child herself knows, but she will not impose her knowledge on Sally. So, she is able to dissociate between the characters, that is the idea. So, theory of mind comes into play here. What I know, Sally is a different person, Sally does not know what happened, I have seen, she has not. So, she will still look for the ball in the basket, that is the idea. Now, there are these two assumptions. So, change now there is this very interesting thing about theory of mind, that children tend to pass the test at 4 years of age and they fail it, whereas at age 3. So, around till 3 years of age, children typically do not pass this test. After 4 they all almost all cases children pass the test, but why does it happen that way? In normal population all children perform in the similar way. Of course, atypical children do not, but otherwise yes. So, what is the reason behind this? There are many theories put forward. One of them is that the change is dependent upon the child's language development. This has to do with language. So, which aspect of language? The mastery of grammatical rules of embedding, tensed complement clauses and so on. So, this is a time when this seems to correlate with the child's development with respect to complex syntactic properties of languages. So, embedding and complex clauses and so on. So, once you have been able to understand sentences like I saw the man who came to the market where I went to buy groceries, like this when you go on. So, you have understood the complex grammatical rules, the subject verb agreement and so on. So, that is the time when you are able to also pass the theory of mind test, that is the idea. But recent findings do not support this link between understanding sentence complement and theory of mind reasoning. Young children who do well on syntax and semantic tasks are still found unable to pass the false belief task. So, that remains kind of constant, that at age 4 they will, even if the child masters syntactic task before that age, they still do not pass the false belief task. Another theory is that have attributed to the development of strengthening of inhibitory processes and pragmatic skills, or basically general purpose executive control mechanism. So, the executive function in humans they also develop in stages. So, this has been understood to be going in hand in theory of mind. So, the time when executive control mechanisms are slightly more or less in place, that is when theory of mind also is mastered by children. So, these are the two most important theoretical aspects. And so, whatever the theory says, it seems that child's performance on story based theory of mind reasoning depends on the child's early exposure to conversations that teaches them that people have beliefs that can differ from their own. What are we arriving at here? Even if we may do or do not agree with respect to the syntactic complexities having anything to do with theory of mind, there is an agreement that has emerged over a period of time now, that syntactic complexities and all maybe they may or may not hold, but what is critical for development of theory of mind is the child's exposure to language per se, or more crucially conversations around him. Why so? Because conversations, human conversations typically talk about other people, right. So, we all know that theory or that that idea that smaller people, lesser mortals talk about people, higher mortals talk about ideas and so on. So, this holds true for most of us. So, when we converse, when we discuss, when we talk about others, we primarily talk about many other people. So, when we talk about people, we talk about their belief, we talk about their behavior and all that. So, that becomes an indirect source of information for ratifying the idea of theory of mind in children. That is what has been a very important theoretical standpoint with respect to how children develop. So, exposure to conversation about other human beings, this is the idea. Now, this idea has not been put forward in a vacuum. A very important data source for this comes from studies on deaf children. Now, these studies are based on the assumption that deaf children from two different kinds of backgrounds, deaf children from sign language environment versus deaf children from verbal language environment. It has been reported that deaf children from deaf families perform at par with age matched hearing children, age matched control, which is hearing children. However, deaf children from hearing families showed significant delay in theory of mind tasks that has been reported. There have been many studies, but one of the first was by Brenda et al. In 2007. Similar findings of late also, one of the most recent findings was in 2021. They have carried out similar experiments on Thai language speakers. So, similar findings have been reported in many other countries, many other cultures and other languages. So, the primary finding is that deaf children from deaf families typically have seem to have a simply a normal sort of a theory of mind development. However, children who are from the hearing families, they do not. Why is it so? The idea is that the theory of mind sign language, children from sign language environment have early exposure to others conversation, because they are also deaf and mute. So, they will be conversing. So, the child's access to other people's conversation is possible in a signing environment. However, in families where the other people are speaking people, they are using vocal auditory loop of language, verbal language, there the child has no access, because child is deaf and mute. So, they have no access to that use of language, that conversation where you talk about other people, and as a result of which they do not develop theory of mind. So, the findings have consistently showed this particular pattern, that there is a delay with respect to this. Now, this is of course one, this is a area that is still developing. There are still studies getting being carried out in many places, but this is where we are today. So, mental states cannot be observed directly, nor is there any simple correlation between mental states and observable behavior. Hence, one valuable way to learn about the elusive content of mind is to listen how people talk about the mind. So, research in developmental psychology suggests the importance of verbal communication for developing a theory of mind, and this is what has been corroborated by the findings on deaf and mute children. A similar correlation was also found in samples of both healthy children and children with autism and other kinds of developmental disorders. So, this is about theory of mind and its connection with language. So, this is where we end this lecture. In the next lecture, we will take up the idea of joint attention and how joint attention shapes social cognition in children, and also another recent domain of knowledge called body schematics, and how that also contributes to language acquisition among children. Thank you.